So was that yesterday? Right around this time yesterday, we heard a presentation about CETE from some consultants that had done some work on it. Full disclosure, I have not read the report. I don't know who else in this room has read the full report. But I'm wondering, and of course, sort of the policy side will happen in other places, but wondering if folks have thoughts or next steps you'd want to have in for witnesses to talk about the finance of CTE. Yeah,
Well, I think I'd like to hear from.
we could just like talk amongst ourselves even. I'm not even going to call on people. Just
Okay.
try to freely organize yourself.
I thought it might be nice to hear from the Superintendent's Association, Principals Association, and maybe even the business managers, something where we could understand what happens when a student wants to avail themselves of CTE. How does it impact their school budget process? So that we can understand what the obstacles are for the school, so that we can somehow help them with a formula so that kids go to what they need. And also,
I am perhaps foolishly assuming that that part is already in that report, but again, I have not read the report yet.
It's all known, yeah.
well,
Yeah.
I think it's always nice to have testimony.
Agreed.
Anyway, so we all hear something at the same time.
Cool.
And then the other thing is, I'm wondering if, and this might be an important, I don't know, but models where we could do something where around Vermont, there's a way to do some kind of virtual learning where students can avail themselves of the teaching goes on at the technical centers in terms of the substance and how like a car engine works. And then if they could, well, actually, this is outside of our area.
Great.
All right, but no, it could be part of our area in this. And then they could physically go
Then they could
to the
save money
car
by doing it.
mechanic place, for example, and do the hands-on part. But I would like to be sure that whatever expenses there are, that if some people had to travel very long distances and others didn't, that we take that into account in whatever funding formula we have. So, yeah.
One thing that occurred to me as they were talking yesterday is they seem to be indicating the lack of a central unit that somehow directs these tech centers. And I actually think the tech centers were developed to avoid having one central unit. But if that's what it takes to get our kids more highly skilled when they graduate, perhaps we ought to consider that. And that would involve the agency. So maybe, I don't know if that's Brad James or who, but maybe when there's time, we could get someone over to just chat about that possibility.
Mhm.
Centralized agency where the curriculum goes through, they study transportation problems like what you just mentioned, that kind of thing.
I'd be curious to hear from John Castle, the Vermont Rural Education Collaborative. He's a former superintendent and now a sort of advocate for smaller rural communities, and would be particularly interested to kind of hear about how we make it work in places where the number of kids are really disparate. And
on the funding side, I can tell you that Barry just decoupled, if you like, the CTE, developed its own governance board. It's now its own district, so to say. So on the financing side, I would say, contrary to what we think we're hearing on the pre-K, it should not be true that a district somehow gains financially through the aid, the ed fund, regardless of whether a student goes to CTE or not. That's point one. So it's like a matter of financial indifference in any case. Then two things I took away from the report, knowing quite a bit about the CTE and at Spalding, is to insist that the opportunity begin earlier in a person's high school education I'm not sure I'd go into middle school because frankly, that usually involves a different building and there are various obstacles to that, much as I'd like to see it. I took shop when I was in 7th grade, by the way.
I did too.
Yeah. Anyway, and the last thing I would say is for witnesses and connections on the other side, I think all of us could benefit from hearing from the workforce investment boards, which are regional, and ask them point blank. So are you or are you not developing a roster of learning opportunities on the job, which is what their mandate originally was. This is 15 years ago. And I would invite in the president, whom I think you all know, of VTC, with whom I've talked and tried and encouraged a formalization of relationships between VTC and each of the CTEs around the state. And that would allow more fluidity with people essentially getting some college credit, and they may still be at a CTE, or the other way around, going to VTC to finish up some of their high school. So I think that's extremely important. As you probably are aware, the attention bandwidth, I think is the buzz phrase, of the chancellor at the moment is rather stressed. So I would focus on the president of VTC for a little bit of here's what we are doing and what we're thinking, and here are the obstacles we've observed. Sure, superintendents, but as you well know, the Superintendents Association is not in a position to tell the superintendent of Spalding Supervisory Union what to do. So that's an obstacle in its own right.
Couple of takeaways from yesterday's meeting. One, by way of background, I was a WIB coordinator 20 odd years or so. And I was alarmed to see how little has changed from what I heard from yesterday's presentation. In some areas, maybe not in all of them, the tech centers and the high schools compete for funding, because we have yet to establish a clear line that funding follows the student. And some high schools are reluctant to let kids spend as much time as tech centers as they should, because there's a tuition out. And that holds up a lot of things, I think. And I could go on, but in terms of coordination, is there a central command is a lot of word. Is there coordination region through region throughout the state? And my understanding is, didn't learn anything yesterday, there's not, and that's very disappointing.
Under the older model, if I may, Madam Chair, under the older model called the Jobs Partnership Training Act, there was a consolidated council that set policy for the whole state in the area of workforce training. That was, if you will, deconstructed into regional WIBs. And so the answer is no, there is no central.
This last sentence, this
Alas.
lovely low control that we talk about from time to time, sometimes it's very much a stymie. It stymies good efforts, and we know it, we see it, and we're not able to do much about it apparently. And I'll be right back with some.
Jim, before you go,
Yeah.
when the CTE has a student longer than half a day,
Yep.
does that affect the ADM of the sending school?
You'd have to ask Brad James,
So it affects,
but I know,
that way, the money from the
Sure.
debt fund and tuition out.
right, I think you're right on both counts.
And that's, I mentioned the fact that the Central Vermont CTE has created its own separate district precisely to earmark that question. If the CTE remains, as in the case in Rutland, like the Stafford Center, it remains part of the overall governance, then the answer is already fluid, because the student is attending, if you will, Rutland High School. They only, there's no difference between Stafford and
Other
Rutland
schools that send kids there.
But, oh, yeah, sending schools, you're absolutely right. But for the host, there's no difference whether you have a half a day here or a half a day there.
Scott?
When a district sends a CTE student to another district for CTE, Yes, the sending district retains the EDM, retains the weighting, but they do have to send money to the CTE. That works. The kid is still the responsibility of the
Get
city.
the ADM, yeah.
They keep the ADM. The sending district does.
There may be time in the day of teachers at the technical centers who accept the students after the first block of the day, and then students have to travel back to the third block of the day for there to be teaching and learning going on within the parameters of the contract, which says, outside of the, what's now in 11th and 12th grade. And I think there could be creativity there.
I'm wondering if there's a couple, we're gonna need to switch gears in a minute. Are there a couple committee members who want to read the report and then come back to us about what recommendations are in the report that we, in terms of the, not the whole structure of CTE, just the dollar part? Okay, thanks. Got 3 people. We'll set some time aside on the agenda for you to bring it back up with us. Thank you very much.
I just thought of her name, Patricia Moulton is the president of ETC.
Yes.
And yeah,
There's a new job.
yeah. And what I was going to say is that also is a financial,
What's her new job?
Workforce Development Coordinator at Vermont State Colleges.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Workforce Development President or something, but yeah, very
Yeah.
nice.
she's really good. Anyway, the financial fluidity between a PSC and a sending CTE is also a problem for us to
Ran our RDC even brought it up before.
guide the path.
Okay, we're gonna talk about telephones now. Totally switching
Solve
gears.
that problem.
What?
Now we solved that problem.
Well, you know, we solved one step
What's
in
the
the
next
solving.
steps?
Well-
Next steps.
Usually so.
Spitball the ideas or
I have a landline at
the
home.
sections where we gotta work.
I also have a landline at home.
Sure do. Who's cheaper for the
We don't have a Maria or a Stephanie.
It's the phone number, is that?